is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone. I'm sorry, it's been really busy the last few weeks. My son got married on Saturday, and it was a wonderful ceremony, but a lot of work leading up to that. And so I took a couple weeks off to take care of that. And I'm glad to be getting back to it. And of course, the minute I go away, everything falls apart. Afghanistan falls apart, huge hurricane in Louisiana, and a whole lot more. So that's just par for the course. The good news is there will always be another disaster tomorrow. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. I've got a friend of mine, LtCol Sargis Sangari, on to talk with us about what next, what's happening now that Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban. What will the ramifications be of this event throughout the next several years across the Middle East and the rest of the world? So Lieutenant Colonel Sangari, thank you very much for being on with us. I really appreciate it. You lead now the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement since what, like 2014. Tell us about the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, what it does, and let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in Afghanistan.
Chuck, thank you very much. Much appreciated being here, buddy. First of all, congratulations on your son getting married. That's a major milestone in any parent's life.
Yeah.
And I do want to also say thank you very much for your service, because I know that you and Michael Yon been doing a yeoman's work, especially in the Darien Gap, from the Darien Gap all the way into the southern border, and covering major news stories as to what is happening in these conflict zones. So if it wasn't for folks like you doing the work you do, it'd be very difficult for us guys like me to be able to talk about a lot of these issues. Look, I set up the Near East Center on September 11, 2014, in honor of the 3,000 Americans that were murdered on our soil, and then also at the same time in honor of those men and women, the first responders who are still dying from the effects of what happened to us. With that said, as you know, we're coming close to the anniversary of September 11th, and with really the kind of a debacle, bad decisions that were made in Afghanistan, we are not in any position better to be able to really project Americans' capability and credibility across the globe, which is what you need in order to be able to keep the homeland safe.
Yeah, for sure. So in the last several weeks, we've just watched as Afghanistan absolutely crumbled. Now, for those of us that have been following this for any length of time, it was no surprise that the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, when I was there in 2012, I was told by many of the leaders of Afghanistan that we were interviewing that they were already making plans to escape to Dubai or Qatar or other countries, because they knew that the Taliban was going to retake the country even as far back as 2012. But what was surprising and shocking and really disturbing to see was how quickly the U.S. military just departed and left everything behind, how disjointed and disorganized the retreat from Afghanistan turned out to be. How do you describe what's happened, and who do you blame for that in the long run?
Well, look, any rational human being can decipher and say, did we do this on purpose? Did we leave all the equipment that we did on purpose? And I think that when the postmortem has now begun on the issue of Afghanistan, unfortunately, we still have Americans on the ground. Just so you know that I'm heading up to DC just this afternoon, because we're looking at how can we organize the folks on the ground that are still trying to bring people out, Americans out. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get even approval from the State Department to allow Americans to go in there and do that. So, yeah, you know, you're looking at possibly other countries giving you the approvals that the U.S. should be given to allow Americans to escape. Now, in that term, imagine, if you're a congressman sitting in Capitol Hill, when you start asking questions, you have to ask the question: did we leave the military equipment back there on purpose? That question should be asked. And then why is it that we have a State Department that is not going to give approval for even current Americans to leave? And isn't it a shame that we have to ask other countries to give the approval for us to be able to land aircrafts anywhere in Afghanistan to get people out as need be?
Yeah, I'd like to know why the State Department is actively working against these private groups who are trying to get people out and do the things that the U.S. government should have been doing anyway.
Yeah, so what did we do? We transferred military equipment to them, and I just heard of somebody from the State Department, the Department of Defense, just say, "Well, we took the component parts out of these aircrafts." Yeah, but you could buy that on the black market. You could buy pilots on the black market. The Taliban is right now, as of 5 days ago, we're shopping around for pilots. And if I know that Colonel Sangari is sitting here in the States in Skokie, Illinois, I guarantee everybody knows it. Aircrafts, you could buy them on the black market. There's pilots who want to work. There's mechanics who want to work. And especially if you have a Taliban that has billions of dollars in their pockets, and we're giving them more than $1 billion because the Taliban are not asking for $10 per head for those Americans that are left behind. They're asking in the billions. So if you were not going to be spending money, and the whole issue is that we're spending treasure, human capital, and also money in Afghanistan, you're still doing it. You're just giving it to the Taliban, and you're going to have Americans who are going to die on those battlefields, who are going to come back to Dover, and you're not going to even mention their names because it becomes a operation that is secret. Unfortunately, that's how you have to get your folks out now. And most of the technology that was given to include those night vision goggles are going to the Iranians now. The Iranians could not get their hands on these type of equipment because they're under sanction. Iran is flowing oil now into the hands of the Taliban, and the Taliban is basically giving technology transfer to the Iranians. The Chinese have already looked at some of the stuff. They don't need it because they steal our, information anyway through our American companies. And as an example, TSMC out of Taiwan, that's how they stole our F-35 technologies. But they are important because the China, being the lead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that was designed 20 years ago to counter NATO, is now in charge and is probably going to be flying support mission requirements out of Bagram Air Force Base for China's wants a desire to secure its Belt and Road Initiative.
Right. So you touched on something I really wanted to drill down on here, and that is the wider implications of what just happened in Afghanistan. I mean, forget about the 7th century barbarians that are now in charge of that country, and the fact that they're now one of the best equipped militaries in the world. Forget about that. Let's talk about the wider implications of how this relates to Iran, China, to Iraq, and what we'll see with ISIS and the resurgence that's coming, and all of that. Let's start with that technology transfer. So we've just not only transferred incredible amounts of technological expertise in the form of this military materiel that we've turned over to the Taliban, but we've also transferred lots and lots of computers. And what's on those computers? We've got reports of Chinese hackers already in Afghanistan going through every one of those hard drives and gleaning whatever they can about U.S. military. How is this going to affect U.S. national security with Chinese able to get into every one of those computers that we left behind?
Well, it's very simple. It's how China has stolen some of our technology that American companies designed. So this cell phone I have in front of me, I don't need to take a picture. I can just aim it at a location. And if it captures any movement of what might be the location I'm at, the Chinese are taking that now. They're taking the pictures that are in these computers. They're putting it in their advanced AI technology. So it's no longer saying that I recognize glasses, I recognize a glove that somebody has in a photo as AI does. It is actually recognizing facial features of the individuals on the ground. When you match them with the 7,000 biometrics you left on the ground, it is actually identifying not just the people who worked with the Central Intelligence Agency. Keep in mind, when the State Department pulled people out that said they were important to us, they had a lot of third world contract companies with third party contractors who ran operations in the State Department, worked in the embassy that were not considered by the State Department as being individuals deserving of SIVs. However, this was the same person you put in a desk, and every time somebody walked past to go into the RSO's office, he saw them. Iranians and the Taliban right now have found those guys. They're squeezing them because they use the biometrics to do that, to give intel on who are the Central Intelligence Agency operators that are on the ground trying to do what the White House was saying and what the Department of Defense and Department of State was saying, that we're going to have this over the horizon capability. Well, your over the horizon capability just got compromised by your folks leaving stuff on the ground, and every single one of them is known. So either they're going to be double agents for the Chinese, or these are the individuals who are basically going to absolutely dissect the ability of the United States to have any effects. As far as the Pakistan is concerned, China having a $60 billion rebuilding contract, almost like a Marshall Plan for them. Pakistan itself now, if it wants to deny any corridor use for your drones to go in, where are you going to fly them off of? Iran? So you've limited yourself, you stuck yourself in a position where you cannot have effects on the ground the way you thought, unless you work with the Chinese through the Taliban and through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization by taking American dollars and funneling them into the hands of these countries and organizations. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to use US dollars to rebuild the infrastructure in Afghanistan, which is going to allow them to have more of an effect on the Taliban as they use them to target any other Islamists that might be working against them. China has been squeezing the Uyghurs for almost a decade. They're already sending Uyghurs in that they've squeezed almost in a decade into Afghanistan to work for the Chinese. And these Uyghurs that they're going to send in there are literally almost going to be a brigade size element that the Chinese, you could have a maneuver brigade for the Chinese inside Afghanistan, but they're not going to look Chinese. They're going to look like the individuals that China's been squeezing to have their footprint on the ground in Afghanistan. So we're stuck, and ISIS is currently already transitioning through Iran borders back and forth between northern Iraq and Afghanistan. As the day after Kabul fell, we got the words from our guys on the ground, that I was an advisor for those Syrian military force structures in Syria and Iraq, that they're starting to reconstitute. Our worry is by next March, you're going to see ISIS pushing from southern Iraq into north, with Turkey using it as a much more of a need to push farther down into Iraq. Turkish special operations are already on the street, even in the daytime, in Kirkuk, close to the capital of Baghdad. And on the 28th, the spokesman for the military in Iraq announced that the U.S. forces are also pulling out of Iraq. Their combat capabilities would possibly leaving only advisors. That means what you saw in Afghanistan will probably happen also in Iraq, unfortunately, by next March, if we do not fix it.
Yeah, I agree. And so we've just almost completed the Iranian crescent that the Iranians have wanted for a long time by allowing this to happen. We've already ceded Syria. We've already ceded, Turkey's working with ISIS. Turkey is very pro-ISIS. Iran is extending its influence throughout that region, from Afghanistan all the way through Iraq and Syria into Lebanon. What we have just done is handed a huge victory to Turkey and Iran and China and maybe even Russia. Let's talk about China for a minute. We, like you mentioned, here we left these pristine military bases. Bagram Air Base was one of the biggest air bases in that whole region. We just left that, and now that's going to be flying sorties for China, and it's going to help cement their Belt and Road Initiative in that region as they attempt to take over the world.
Yeah, it will. The only hope we have is not that a civil war breaks out in Afghanistan, that Afghanistan implodes. The hope is by, I think, some folks in the current administration, that if they can put enough money in the coffers of the Taliban, or, you're running a narco state, you're billionaires anyway. It's not like you're going to have any worries for money. But their hope is that they can use them to start a fight between the ISIS on the ground and the Taliban, because the ISIS will never come to the table. to work with the Taliban. They're just not going to do it. They're hardliners. Unfortunately, the problem we're running into is that we already knew they were planning for attacks in the United States. And these are not simple attacks, folks. These people have pride. They want to outdo the other guy. So the question I would ask at the Homeland Security with the Federal Bureau of Investigation is, what do you think would be a much more of a broader target for a terrorist to conduct an attack in the US that would even make 9/11 a small act? And that's what they're working towards. They're not working for eaches. Of course, you're going to have eaches that are going to conduct attacks, but they're working for something bigger. Unfortunately, you just gave them an opportunity over a decade to prepare for those eaches in Afghanistan. You may not have attacks against you now, but like you said, if Iran's in Afghanistan, all the way to Lebanon, all the way to the Yemen, you created that crescent form. Iraq is about to fall apart. You got Turkey, which has supported ISIS now much more stronger within the region. You got all the cyber attacks that are going to take care of, be conducted against you, because you literally showed these folks the internal mechanisms of how that could be done by leaving equipment on the ground. Your assets that are human in Afghanistan have already been compromised because you basically expose them through simple pictures and not understanding that the bureaucracy couldn't digest that they were killing their own. With Iran being in Venezuela, having ability even at the smaller level, if it wants to, it's not going to do it, but at smallest level to conduct an EMP attack using its drone from Venezuela against American, electrical grids. And one of the largest embassies Iran has is Mexico, with all these individuals that are coming through the borders, as you and Michael have covered it. You have given the advantage to the enemy at all levels.
That's right. Well, at least we can say that the United States military is now allowing transvestites to serve and with pride. So, that's important when it comes to the greater scheme of things. Unbelievable. It is an absolute travesty what we've seen happen within the United States military. And I would say that this has been a long time coming, because you really could not attain any kind of flag rank since the Obama administration, since 2008, unless you were going to kiss the ring, unless you were on board with the woke agenda and believed and followed wholeheartedly with that. And so the military has been spending its time chasing after windmills of white supremacy within its own ranks. And working on wokeness, making sure that everybody in the military use the right pronouns and things like that. Do you think that that's part of the reason that we've seen such an absolute disaster in Afghanistan? Or would you say that it's more just on the State Department and the administration?
No, look, it's a disaster, but nobody gets fired for, nobody's getting fired from the DOD, nobody's getting fired from the State Department. And the calculus that was made by the current POTUS and his communication team, really, is they're the ones running the show, is that nobody's blaming Nixon for what happened in Saigon, and Americans have a short memory. And even though 87% of Republicans and 86% of Democrats wanted us to stay there to get all Americans out, come day of election, they cannot move their finger from here to vote out their party, because party politics and party loyalty is much more important to them than anything else. So that's what the calculation is. As long as they could win in 2022, 2024, who cares that there's an American woman who might be pregnant, who has to now work through the tribal areas of Afghanistan to escape to a country, as an example, Uzbekistan now, who says that I'm not going to even keep these, Afghan soldiers who escaped here back. The State Department was still issuing visas past the deadline of when we have to come back. So you have to ask the question, if you were going to be pulling out, why were you still issuing visas? And what message did you saying you were going to be sending folks on the ground? We have 1,200 so-called consulates, or across the planet that support these type of visa requirements. And if you took all those people and put them into one area in Afghanistan and had them process everybody through, they would not be able to process 80,000 within the time that you had on the timeline frame. And again, the same State Department is a reason we couldn't get more aircrafts down to get folks out. And it was a process that started 20 years ago, plus when Clinton did the first transfer of technology, you know yourself, Chuck, that the Chinese couldn't even do airfield seizures. And after we did that tech transfer with military technology to the Chinese, that's the first time they started with their ability of being able to do what our Rangers do, which is seize airfields.
Yeah.
And then that's when the change started in what the regular Army was. The Special Operational Force community was still really doing direct action. Because of that, you could easily be able to say who's a good officer, who's not, because they had to prove themselves on the battlefield. When we came back, they basically pruned everybody who had any experience on the battlefield out. They kept what it is today. And today, even the Special Operational Force community is being squeezed, and they're having a hard time being able to just select officers based on their capability rather than based on their looks. As you know, that the Navy Admiral recently said we need to bring the pictures back to the promotion board, which means we have to promote based on color, race, and not based on your ability.
Unbelievable. Well, it's a dark day for America and a dark day for the rest of the world, I think, because of what's happened in Afghanistan. Such a small, out of the way country, but it's having an outsized influence because of what's going on there and because of all its neighbors. So we've left a huge vacuum there. And I guess we can just pray for the Afghan people. Lastly, I see that we've taken in tens of thousands of Afghans and brought them directly to the United States. Some of them have been vetted. Obviously, there were a lot of those people who worked with us that we sort of owe something to. My question is, do we really owe them a home in the United States? I mean, there are lots of people who are coming illegally across our U.S. southern border, over 200,000 a month. But I do notice that as these planes were leaving, these C-17s were absolutely packed with people leaving the runway in Hamid Karzai International Airport, that they were about 99% men, military age males. And it makes me wonder what the kind of honor they have to leave all the women and children behind as they get themselves out and get to the United States. I believe wholeheartedly they should have the right to leave if they don't want to stay under the Taliban, of course. But do they necessarily need to come to the United States? And would it have been perhaps a better idea just to hand them a rifle and some ammunition and send them back into Kabul and say, you go fight for your country and fight for your women and children. Don't expect us to do it.
Well, you see, this was part of the problem too. State Department, usually there's a 5-page memo that you do, and that 5-page memo with other countries around and the stands would be to say, look, we know we have to leave. Here's how many SIVs we have. We would like you to take maybe 3,000 of these folks, put them in temporary hold in a refugee status in your basing. We'll pay for it if need be, but we need to be able to process them that way. The problem was they didn't even do a 5-page memo. That's how broken your State Department is. I mean, we have ships that have been, because of COVID, sitting in dry dock and birds been pooping all over them. You could have taken one of those and had it ready to go. Again, either is the level of incompetence so bad that you can't get a 5-page memo done and you're not going to fire anybody because they didn't do that, which forced them to have to bring the people back here. And then the same thing happens in the southern border. The people who rushed the plane, some of them that were not even vetted, that did not deserve to be here, are going to be here. The problem is now you cannot send them back. They're not going to choose to do it until, at least under this administration. These are going to be individuals who are going to be sitting on your, American taxpayer payroll forever until the day they pass. The ones who did it the right way, the ones who serve with the American forces, the one who have family on the ground, the one who went through the process, the ones who were still working with us to the last second, to include the clerk who's looking at documents to make sure the contracts are right. You didn't bring them out. You didn't even give them an opportunity.
Yeah,
So, and you had those guys process paperwork to give money to the Taliban, really signing their own death warrant, which you're using them to die. This is a black mark on the United States. I will tell you, if you're a woman who had an SIV, who served U.S. forces, and you are now raped and pregnant, by the Taliban, don't you think that woman is going to raise a child that is going to be one of the best terrorist leaders possible, that 10, 20 years from now they'll show up, and God hoping it doesn't happen, find out, possibly reach out and touch your nephew or my nephew or my grandkids and kill them?
Right. Yeah, I think we just did this in the absolute worst possible way. This is almost there will be doctoral theses written about the debacle in Afghanistan. So anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming on. We really needed to get into this because, like I said, I've been offline for the last couple of weeks, just watching all this stuff happen while I've been sanding the deck on my house. So I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to getting on your show sometime.
No, definitely, Chuck. I am definitely going to have you on New Paradigms as soon as possible.
Fantastic.
God bless, buddy. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks a lot. God bless you.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2021.